I trusted them for 90 years, 90 birthdays, 90 winters, 90 times watching the world change and believing deep down that some things never would. I believed blood was thicker than doubt. I believed loyalty aged like wine. I believed that the people who stood beside my crib would stand beside my grave. I was wrong. No one wakes up one morning and decides to mistrust their own family. It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't explode. Slowly, quietly, like wood rotting from the inside, while the paint still shines. And that is the most dangerous part. At 90 years old, you don't fear strangers. You don't fear the dark. You don't even fear death the way you once did. You fear realization. You fear looking back and understanding something you should have seen decades ago. You fear the sentence that begins with, "I should have known." They were there for everything. First steps, first heartbreak, first home I ever bought. They clapped when I succeeded. They cried when I struggled. They told me, over and over again, they're always here for you, and I believed them. I believed them when they helped me sign documents I didn't fully read. I believed them when they insisted they set handle things. I believed them when they said I was too old to worry about that, because love sounds like protection, and protection sounds like control. But you don't notice the difference until it's too late. There were moments, small ones, when something inside me shifted. A look that lasted a second too long. A whisper that stopped when I entered the room. A decision made for my own good that I never actually agreed to. Tiny things, insignificant things, or so I told myself, because admitting suspicion means admitting vulnerability. And I had already lived through wars, economic collapses, funerals. I had buried friends, outlived siblings, watched entire generations disappear. Surely, I wasn't going to be undone by my own blood. That says the arrogance of experience. You think survival equals wisdom. You think age equals immunity. You think betrayal has a face you can recognize. It doesn't start. Betrayal often looks like kindness. It sounds like concern. It feels like someone holding your arm while quietly guiding you somewhere you never meant to go. The day I realized the truth wasn't set dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no final argument, just a piece of paper, and a sentence, and the way everyone avoided my eyes. 90 years of trust. And in one moment I understood something that had been unfolding for decades. But by then, the signatures were already inked, the decisions already made, the power already transferred, and the room felt smaller than it ever had before. You think it can happen to you. You think, my family would never. I thought that too, for 90 years. And the worst part? The signs were always there. I just refused to see them. Because sometimes the greatest danger in your life isn't at the enemy outside your door. It's the one you've been protecting inside your heart. And by the time you realize that, yous have already given them everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because to understand how it all collapsed, you first have to understand how safe it felt. For decades, life felt predictable. The house smelled the same every morning. Fresh bread, faint lavender from the hallway, the soft creak of the stairs as someone moved before sunrise. It wasn't step wealth that gave me comfort. It wasn't set a title or position. It was certainty. The quiet, unquestioned assumption that everything and everyone around me was as it should be. I trusted their words. I trusted their routines. I trusted that what was written in family stories, in habits, in decades of repetition, was enough. And in that trust, I built my world. We all build our own fortresses of belief. Psychologists call it the illusion of safety. We convince ourselves that stability is eternal, that human nature, when it comes to those closest to us, is unchanging. I believed that. I believed because I wanted to, because accepting anything else would have been too heavy for my shoulders. I remember sitting at the dining table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching them laugh across the room, and in that laughter, I heard the echo of every promise ever made. We shall take care of you. We shall always hear. And I believed it. We all do, in some way. History teaches us that blind trust is comfortable. We see it in entire societies, in regimes, in institutions, people surrendering control because someone told them it would be safe, and for a while it is. But safety, when it is built on assumption rather than understanding, is fragile. I remember the first small doubt. It was so minor, so dismissible, that I laughed at myself for even noticing it. A misplaced document, a hushed phone call, a detail in a story that didn't quite match the memory of years past. I convinced myself it was nothing. Surely 90 years of closeness couldn't be undone by a few incongruities. Surely trust was just so delicate. But trust, I learned, is not measured by time. It is measured by vigilance, by recognition, by truth. And my vigilance had long since been surrendered. The first warning sign came in the form of a simple suggestion. They told me it was for my benefit. A small reorganization of my affairs, a slight adjustment to my life plan. I hesitated, but I trusted them, because that is what we do when we feel safe. We surrender the reins, and that is when the cracks begin. It's easy to mistake comfort for security. It's as easy to mistake love for agreement. It's easy to ignore the small things when the foundation feels solid. But the first crack is always invisible, until one day it isn't set, and by then it's no longer a choice whether you see it or not. The illusion of safety ends quietly, and what comes next is the first glimpse of betrayal. The first cracks were almost imperceptible. A word left unsaid, a meeting that I wasn't invited to, a smile that felt rehearsed. I remember thinking, imagining things. I had lived 90 years. Surely I could read a room. Surely I could distinguish truth from illusion. But even the sharpest eyes can be blinded by trust. It started small, subtle shifts in behavior that seemed insignificant. A document misplaced, and then found at just the right moment. A friendly suggestion that turned into a decision already made. Hints of secrecy, where transparency once reigned. And every time I dismissed it. They're just trying to protect me, I told myself. I am overthinking again. I am old. I haven't seen too much. Humans are experts at rationalizing. We convince ourselves that the anomalies in our world are coincidences, that nothing malicious could come from those who raised us, who held us, who swore to protect us. But cracks, no matter how small, always widen. I began noticing patterns I couldn't ignore. Late night whispers in hallways, excuses for changes I never authorized. A phone call abruptly ended when I entered the room. It was never blatant. It was never violent. It was subtle, psychological, almost invisible. And that sip's the most insidious kind, because subtlety breeds doubt, and doubt breeds silence, and silence is the breeding ground for betrayal. I tried to talk myself out of it. I clung to what I knew. I clung to memories of laughter, holidays, milestones. I clung to 90 years of assurances. But the cracks were real. They were small, yes, but deliberate, like a hairline fracture in glass, barely noticeable until the moment it shatters. The first real warning arrived in an unexpected form, a simple conversation, a request for me to sing something I didn't fully understand. I paused, I hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw it, the flicker of impatience in their eyes. It was then I realized these weren't set mistakes. These weren't set accidents. These were the first moves in a game I hadn't agreed to play. But even then, I convinced myself I could control it. I believed that awareness was enough. I was wrong. The cracks had begun, and soon what was hidden behind trust would begin to show its true face. What comes next isn't set gentle. It isn't subtle. The first cracks widen, and suddenly the world I thought I knew starts to tilt. By now the cracks were no longer small. They had grown, spreading silently, threading through every corner of my life. I noticed it in the tone of their voice, the casual way decisions were explained after they were already made, the slight hesitation when I asked questions that once would have been answered openly. It wasn't set chaos yet, not really. It was something far more dangerous. Denial. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that loyalty, decades deep, couldn't simply vanish overnight. But escalation doesn't ask permission. It creeps in, often under the guise of normalcy. I remember the first time I confronted them directly. Why was this done without telling me? I asked. They smiled, polished, calm, reassuring. It was for your own good, they said. You would never understand. And just like that, the room closed in. It's a peculiar kind of horror, watching someone you trust gradually bend reality around you. The people you believe will stand beside you begin standing over you. And the worst part, everyone else seems to agree. Authorities, neighbors, even distant family nod in silent approval, convinced the narrative they've been told. I started noticing the emotional toll, the exhaustion of constantly second-guessing myself, the anxiety of every phone call, the weight of every letter. I was not powerless. Not yet, but the emotional strain was enough to make hesitation feel like defeat. Denial is a powerful tool. It allows people to justify decisions that would otherwise feel cruel. It masks manipulation as concern. It masks control as care. I began to see it in subtle acts, documents misplaced until signing was inevitable, conversations deliberately misdirected, promises repeated, but never fulfilled. Every small move was a strategy, every reassurance a trap, and slowly, painfully, I realized that no one outside of me could see the danger. No one could or would intervene, because the very people responsible for protecting me had rewritten the rules of trust. It was a cruel, quiet escalation, the kind that leaves no scars, only questions, the kind that leaves a person questioning themselves. And that was the final terrifying realization of this stage. You can see the cracks, you can name the betrayals, but until you act, until the choice is made, denial protects the betrayer, not the betrayed. The world I had believed safe was no longer safe, and the first heavy consequences were waiting, just out of sight. There is a moment in every betrayal when you realize you could have stopped it, but that moment is fleeting. For me it came with a single signature, a document I did not fully read, a trust I assumed would be honored, a reassurance that everything was under control. I hesitated. I even thought of walking away, but the words of decades whispered louder than caution. They fear family. They would never hurt you. And in that hesitation, I chose trust over doubt. It was the last chance to change the outcome. Everything that followed was a consequence of ignoring that warning. The choices we make or fail to make define the limits of our control. Until this point, I thought I was merely cautious, thoughtful, reasonable. But denial had blinded me. Confidence had lulled me. And loyalty had chained my eyes shut. I remember the day clearly. The way sunlight fell through the blinds, the quiet hum of a refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint smell of old paper and ink, and there it was. The document placed before me with a polite insistence. It should have felt ordinary. It should have been mundane. But something inside me knew instinctively that the act would define everything that came next. I asked questions. I was answered vaguely. I was reassured. And I signed. That signature was not just ink on paper. It was the final hand extended to betrayal, the point of no return. After that day, nothing could be undone. I would soon discover that the people I trusted for 90 years had been maneuvering the entire time. Every word, every smile, every act of kindness had been carefully measured, not for me, not for love, but for control. Regret is a slow-burning fire. It does not scream. It does not announce itself. It waits. It lingers, and it grows heavier with every passing hour. I could see the consequences forming, like shadows stretching across the walls. I could hear them, whispering, "You had your chance. You chose trust." And there was nothing left to do. The world I had known, the sense of safety, of family, of loyalty, had already begun to collapse. And when it fully fell, there would be no going back. The collapse was not sudden. It did not announce itself with fanfare or fury. It was quiet, slow, almost imperceptible, like ink spreading in water. I watched as small disruptions turned into larger fractures, bills misplaced, accounts inaccessible, decisions made that affected me long before I understood what had happened. And it was the silence that was most terrifying. No arguments, no confrontations, just absence, empty rooms, avoided eyes. The people I had spent 90 years trusting were no longer there in the ways that mattered. They were present physically, but absent in loyalty, in honesty, in truth. I wandered through my own home, feeling it shrink around me. The walls that once held warmth and laughter now felt like cages. Every familiar object, every photograph, every memory felt like evidence of a life quietly taken from me. Confusion settled like dust. Fears seeped into corners I thought were untouched. Every phone call, every letter, every visit carried a weight I could not shake. I tried to speak. I tried to confront. But words are useless once trust has been weaponized. The collapse was as much internal as external. My mind replayed every choice, every hesitation, every sign I had ignored. I questioned myself endlessly. Could I have stopped this? Was there a single moment when it could have been different? And the answer was always the same: too late. I realized something about betrayal that no one tells you. It doesn't always destroy with noise. It doesn't always end in anger. It seeps slowly until the life you thought you had no longer exists. By the time the reality fully set in, the damage was complete, control lost, independence stripped, trust, once the foundation of my life, reduced to ash. And in that quiet collapse, I felt an emptiness that words cannot fully capture, a loneliness that was not mere solitude, but the realization that the world I had believed in was never real. Everything I had held dear had been taken while I watched, believing it was safe, and there was nothing left to stop it. But the aftermath is a story all its own. The world after collapse is quieter than you expect, not empty, exactly, but muted, like the echo of life after a storm has passed, leaving only the brittle traces behind. I sat for hours in rooms I once filled with laughter. The walls seemed taller now, the shadows deeper. Every familiar object was a reminder of what had been lost, not in money or possessions, but in trust, in certainty, in the belief that the people closest to you are on your side. Grief doesn't always roar. Often it whispers. It settles into your chest, into your memory, into the rhythm of your days, and it makes you question everything. I began replaying decades in my mind, the small hints I had dismissed, the whispers I had ignored, the signs I had refused to see. It is a cruel kind of clarity, realizing the extent of betrayal, not because it shocks you, but because it is almost invisible until the weight of years presses down. The people I trusted, the ones I had given everything to, had never been who I thought they were. And yet in the aftermath, there is a strange, bitter lesson. You see the patterns now that were invisible before. You understand how easily trust can be manipulated. You understand how fragile loyalty can be when built on convenience rather than integrity. I spent days wandering through my own memories, looking at photographs, reading old letters. The laughter and the smiles now felt like part of a play I hadn't realized I was in. It is tempting, in moments like these, to give in entirely, to close yourself off, to swear that no one ever again will enter your heart so completely. But that is not the final truth. The final truth is that you survive, you endure, you remember, and in remembering you begin to understand not just what was lost, but what must never be repeated. By the time the dust settled, I understood the consequences were not just external, they were etched into me, a deep, permanent understanding of human nature, of trust, of betrayal, of the quiet ways in which a life can be redirected without your knowledge, until it no longer belongs to you. And in that stillness a voice emerged, not theirs, but mine, a voice saying, "If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." The lesson is heavy, it is personal, and it demands attention, because what comes next is the warning. If there is one thing I have learnt in 90 years, it is this: trust is not a guarantee, not with strangers, not with acquaintances, and sometimes not even with those who claim your blood as their own. The world is quiet in its betrayals. It moves softly, deliberately waiting for complacency to take root. It doesn't knock on your door. It doesn't shout a warning. It whispers. It nudges. It reassures. And if you listen too long, if you believe too completely, it will take everything you never imagined losing. I speak to you now, not from anger, nor from bitterness, but from the weight of truth. Do not ignore the small signs. Do not dismiss the fleeting doubts. Do not assume that love or loyalty is eternal, because those who betray you rarely arrive as enemies. They arrive as guardians, as protectors, as family, and when the realization hits, it is too late. The signature has been signed. The control has been transferred. The life you thought was yours, quietly redirected. I trusted them for 90 years. And in the end, the lesson is simple and terrible. You cannot rely on time, affection, or familiarity to protect you. Vigilance is the only safeguard. Awareness is the only armor. Skepticism, gentle, careful, measured, is the only way to survive a world where those closest to you can become the architects of your undoing. So look closely, listen carefully, notice what is hidden in plain sight, because waiting, as I did, trusting blindly, as I did, only ensures one thing: by the time you understand the truth, it will already be too late.